Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of our Christmas tutorials. In this one we're going to draw Santa and his reindeers passing in front of the moon, and we're going to be using our graphite and charcoal pencils. So I hope you enjoy this one and let's get started. Okay, so this one here is going to be 10 by 10 centimeters. And I'm actually using a new paper that I'm trying out, but you don't need to have this brand. Any sort of paper that's suitable for graphite will do. I usually use the Strathmore Bristol smooth paper, but this one is I think it's Daler Rowney smooth heavyweight. So this is my first time trying that, so I just wanted to see what it was like before I do a larger portrait on it. So we're going to attack this a little bit differently with a mixture of charcoal and graphite. Now the reason that I'm using the charcoal is that I want to get this sky in the back, or space I suppose it is, completely black. And I'll get there a lot quicker by using my charcoal pencil than I will building up layers of graphite. And getting a dark sort of background is possible, but like I said, for the nature of this tutorial where, we want it to be a little bit quicker, we'll come in with the charcoal. Now, I probably won't, although the little reindeer and the sleigh is as dark as the background, I probably won't come in with my charcoal pencil. And the only reason for that is I just don't think I'll get quite a sharp enough point to get these lovely sort of antler details and things in there. So we may need to just build those up a little bit with our graphite pencils, but we'll see how we go. So first of all, we'll come in and we'll get this background done. Now, any charcoal pencil will do. This is just a Derwent dark. So make sure you get the dark. You can get light, medium and dark. So we want a nice dark one there. Another one that I've got is the Pitt, Faber-Castell Pitt charcoal. I don't know if you can see that in the lights there. But that's another good one as well. But any charcoal pencil should do the trick. Now, what we do want to be careful of here, just sort of going back a little bit there, when I've transferred my line art, yeah, I'm probably, not that great at getting exactly a circle. So all I've done is I've just taken my roll of tape, which was a very similar size to the line art, and I've just popped that down and just transferred my actual moon round that. And then I've taken the line art, just a bit of graphite on the back, put that down in place. You could have your little reindeers maybe going up slightly if you wanted to. So this gives you the option to just move that around a little bit as to where you want to place your little sleigh. And then I've just basically just plotted in roughly where these darker sections is, but we're not going to stress about getting every little crater and things like that on the moon, for the sole reason is we're working in a very small space, so we'll just try and do the best that we can with the space that we've got. All right, so we want to come round our moon, but we want to be very careful. And what I might do, I've got a slightly sharper point on my Faber-Castell. So what I might do is I'll use it to come right up to the edge of our moon, and just hope that I don't get a bit of the shakes and ruin that lovely shape. But look, if you do go a little bit skewy, it's not gonna be the end of the world. Now you are going to get a bit more dust with the charcoal than we, would using our graphite. So just every now and again, just give it a little bit of a I don't usually, I mean, I'm doing it right now, but I don't usually blow my dust away. I do like to sort of control where these particles of dust do go. Oh, see, I've gone over my moon there a little bit. That's all right. What I usually use is one of these puffer tools that for cleaning keyboards and things like that. So these are great, and then I usually just direct it down and it just gets caught at the bottom of my easel. Now with that little bit there that I've just gone slightly over, I'm just going to give it a little clean. Look, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because we can put a little shaded bit of graphite there. Whether it belongs or not, it's not really going to make much difference. But I do suggest, especially, you know, not so much of this one because we are putting in this dark background, but if you are ever using just white as your background, try and keep everything as clean as you can. If you see that there's a bit of pigment there, get rid of it as soon as possible, because it does tend to get smudged into your artwork. Be very careful that it hasn't maybe gone under your glassine. Now if you don't have glassine paper, don't worry, you can always just use a piece of printer paper. All we want to do is just make sure that we're not picking up all of this charcoal actually onto our hand and then sort of smudging things. So we just want to be aware of that. So just take your time. I'm just trying to build up a bit of that border, like I said, with a slightly sharper pencil, because we certainly don't need a sharp pencil for blocking in the rest of the background. And if I don't have to sharpen a pencil, I'd rather not. Again, just make sure we're getting rid of that dust. I'm going to just put my glassine just over a little bit. Now, feel free to move your drawing around. I don't like to do that while I'm actually filming. So I'll try and just, I'm sorry if I'm obscuring anything at the moment. It's just so that I could sort of try and move my hand into the best position. Almost there. Now, I've managed that reasonably well. A few little bits maybe have gone just a little bit haywire, but not too bad in the grand scheme of things. I'm just going to widen this in some places just a little bit. And just go back around and over if I feel that I'm seeing too much of that paper. And then we can come in and just block in the rest. Okay, now like I said, you are going to get a bit of dust here, but don't stress too much. Be careful if any does drop onto the moon, that you're not leaning on it and pressing it into the paper. Try and come right up to your tape. That way when you pull your tape off, you've got a nice crisp edge. Just pay attention as well that, like I said, a blunt pencil is fine, but we do want to be careful of it getting too close to that wood casing, because we don't want to be scratching our paper. So just keep an eye on it. Try and rotate your pencil as well when you're doing this. It sort of keeps it into a more uniform sort of shape as you go. Each here, getting that nice and crisp. You can see just how much quicker this process is using the charcoal. If we were doing this with our graphite pencils, would maybe be on our, would only be on our first layer. It would take us a fair bit of time just to build that up. Gonna give this just a little puff, get rid of that. These little puffer tools are excellent, and they're not expensive. Like I said, any office supply store would have them because, like I said, I think they're aimed for cleaning out your keyboards or maybe a camera lens, that sort of thing. But I use this all the time. Careful with that wood casing. We're not getting too close there. There's most things in, either in pastel drawings, probably any drawing, that, we can fix. But if you scratch into that paper, yeah, pretty impossible to come back from. I give that just a little sharpen before we go any further. Like I said, I'm not worried about a sharp point. I just want to get that casing back. And I just use my craft knife. I use my craft knife really for all my sharpening, even my graphite pencils. A bit better. When I come back over, I can just see a bit of that paper just peeking through in a few of these little sections. And just change the direction. If you've gone in one direction, put that first layer down. Just switch it up a bit and come in a different direction. That's usually all you'll need, just to get rid of that little bits of white paper still sort of peeking through. Lower it down a bit as we come closer to the moon. Oh, see, I was a bit naughty there, you see. I'm blowing that in the wrong direction. And just, again, make sure you haven't got any sort of underneath your glassine either. Again, if it gets sort of trapped under there and you move it, it will sort of just push that pigment down into the paper. This pencil is getting a little bit on the short side, so I always recommend as well that you probably invest in just a pencil extender, so that when your pencils do get to a certain length, you can pop it in there, because really your pencil should be sitting in that little sort of crook of your hand there, and mine's is sort of here, which makes your pencil move about a bit more. Not so much an issue doing a background like this, but if you were wanting to do a bit finer detail on something, you want a bit more control over your pencil. Again, just that just almost done. Now we don't need to push this down into the paper with a blender or anything like that, because that's when we'll, we'll mute that color, that depth that we're looking for. And that's the last thing that I want to do. I want to keep it nice and dark. Because if you come in with a sponge or a paper stump or anything like that, it's going to lift a bit of that pigment. It's just the nature of those tools. And I never use my fingers, especially for my graphite drawings, for the sole reason is, it would be like a bit of a crime scene. If you've got any oils or anything on your fingers, it would just get picked up and leave a mark. I mean, when you think about it, that's exactly what these sort of forensic teams and that use, I suppose. It's a graphite powder sort of thing for lifting up fingerprints. So pastels, yes, I love to use my fingers to blend, but for my graphite, and probably for my charcoal as well, I think it just picks up way too much of the oils in your skin. I'll get another tiny little bit over here, and then that is that background done. All right, like I say, you can see the depth that you get in that would have taken us hours with the graphite and we still wouldn't have got that result. Okay, so I'll put that one down now. We've got that as clean as we can. All right, now what I want to do now is grab my mechanical pencil, and I just use one. It's the 0.7, and I just get a 2B lead to fit that pencil, and that just gives you a lovely nice dark sort of marking. It's got such a fine point that it works really, really well, just for getting those really fine details. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go over my line art for the Santa and the reindeers. I just want to make sure that I've got that nice and defined before I come in with some graphite powder. Again, just keep an eye on your reference, see if you need to make any sort of little adjustments, or we'll just try and get that in as best as we can. Tiny little nose there. I might go a little bit quiet here for a second, just while I'm sort of concentrating. It is a tiny little bit more fiddly. I'm going to just do my reindeers first. And look, they don't have to be absolutely perfect. I'll try and get these legs in as best as I can. Little antlers. Again, just try your best to get as much detail as you can. Now, of course, if you were doing this one on a larger scale, then obviously you would get a lot more detail in there. But like I said, we've got to be just a wee bit realistic as to what we can achieve on such a small little drawing. And it's actually a good thing to sort of master, because you know, there is going to come time when we do have to make tiny little details on our drawings. So it's good to just have that practice with that control. Last one here. I mean, we are going to block these in. All I'm wanting to do at the moment is just get that shape, that outline in. Just come in and pop in that rope. Now, if you do sort of worry about getting that straight line, which, you know, again, like I said, I'm not exactly the best at, just come in with something, a little ruler or something, and you can always just pop that on and just, you know, go along with that, just to get that nice straight edge. I think you've always got to freehand stuff. All right, so that's our little sleigh in place. Now what I want to do is I want to come in with my graphite powder. Now, all I do, unfortunately I don't have an extra camera to show you, but I get a piece of sandpaper and I just get like an 8B, you know, pencil. Let's see if I've got one here. There we go. So this is just an old one out of my son's old school bag. And I just keep that one, it's 8B, and I sort of rub that a few times onto a piece of sandpaper, and you'll see that you'll build up some dust, you know, some powder, and that's what I use for my graphite powder. And if you wanted to have a lighter one, then you just use a lighter pencil. So you could use maybe a 2B perhaps, or maybe even a B, if you just wanted something a bit lighter. And then I always have a little piece of just normal printer paper underneath, so that I can rub my lost the word for it now, paper stump, that's the one. I can rub my paper stump onto it, and that just lets me control more of the graphite powder I'm laying down. So I've already got a little bit here on my sandpaper, and I've also got a paper stump that I've got from my other sort of graphite tutorials. So I'm just going to see how much I've got on there already. I'm not going to add any more yet. All right, and then all we do is we want to come in and get our darker sort of areas sort of plotted in first. So where we can see on the moon, you know, these sort of ones that I've plotted in with the line art, you can come in and you can actually just pop them in first. So just little circular motions. Now, one thing to note, remember, this is still graphite that we've popped down here. So when you come in and about with your blender, just don't go over the top, because you're just going to smudge and blend that. So just a little bit of control. Just look at where you're actually, you know, popping down that pigment and blending. And look, like I said, we're only working on a very small scale here. So don't be trying to get every single sort of crater and dark sort of shadow on the moon. We just want to sort of make it look like a moon, more or less. So really, it's up to yourself. It's your discretion as to, you know, where you would like to put some of these darker areas. Now be careful coming up to that charcoal. It's not the end of the world if it does sort of transfer on and come down into your drawing, but we'll try our best to avoid that if we can. Just gonna add a bit of shading just on that outside edge there. You can see it's a bit darker in the reference photo. Again, just a little bit lighter pressure if you want an area to be a bit lighter. I do like to try and get these darker areas in first, because usually that's when you've got the most pigment on your actual paper stump. Now if you feel that they're not getting dark enough, just add a little bit more graphite powder. But what I'm going to do is try and get as much out of this as I possibly can to start with, and then maybe come in with a second layer. Again, keep your strokes nice and soft, just little circular sort of motions. You can see that I'm just sort of going round and round. I don't really want this to be too harsh. Dark sort of all the way underneath our reindeers here. Don't forget we've got these little sections in here, but like I said, just be careful. Don't, like I said, this is really important. This is just a fun little drawing. You know, we don't want to be stressing ourselves out worrying about where one of these darker areas on the moon are actually sitting. All of these little sort of crater effect and things will lift that out with our erasers. Don't worry either if you've gone a little bit too dark in a spot either, because we can always, I'll show you as we go how we can, you know, lift that up and lighten areas if we need to. Again, we've got a slightly darker little edge just running up there, and then it's nice and bright on the edge. It's not white though. It's not a pure white moon. We will lift some of these, like I said, these little sort of dots and that out. But if you're ever going to be using, I'm just picking up a little bit more of that powder. If you're lifting detail out with your erasers. There has to be enough pigment there already to make your highlights that you're lifting out, you know, look bright. Otherwise, all you're doing is just trying to lift highlights on white paper, which just, you know, you're never going to get that lovely contrast. So always make sure that you've got enough graphite down. Doesn't have to be loads, but you do need coverage. The only time I would say that you wouldn't sort of worry about touching the paper would be maybe on a highlight in an eye, for example, or just something that is really, really bright. Then I would leave just the paper, because you're never going to get that brightness. You know, but as soon as you put graphite down there, you're never going to get it back to, you know, as bright as it should be. Now these little marks and things like that, I'm just sort of going a little bit sort of gung-ho and adding a few dots here and there, just where they're a little bit darker. Bit of a mark there. Just have a bit of a look, see what you think. A little bit there maybe. Try not fall into the trap though of having it as a solid sort of straight line. You want to keep it, like I said, you want to keep it soft. Again, like I said, we're limited. We are limited. There. Okay, what I'm going to do now with the pigment that I've already got on there, now that we've got these darkest ones in, we're going to have a bit of a look first of all and see if we're happy with that depth. They're not black, so we don't want to be going too dark. So we can always just come back over. And if you did feel you wanted to be a little bit darker, you just sort of judge that on your drawing, then you can just lift up a little bit more of that graphite powder. And you can just sort of come back in, add a little bit more. Like I said, we don't want these being too dark. Okay, now I'm going to rub that, because I did pick up another little bit of that graphite powder. I'm going to give it a wee rub on my printer paper, just to lift some. And then I'm just going to come back in and across and just very, very lightly add some more of that graphite. Now I'm not pressing hard. I want it to be lighter than what's there already, but I want to be putting down pigment all over the moon, because like I said, when we come to lift those highlights out, we need to have that contrast. Again, just soft circular sort of motions. Even sort of put your paper stump slightly on an angle so that it's more on the side. We want to be careful that we're not sort of creating, you know, harsh sort of marks on our paper. Again, careful around our little reindeers. Nice light pressure so that we're not lifting that pencil. Now, if you do feel that you've sort of exhausted the graphite that's on your paper stump, dab it lightly into your graphite powder. But like I say, give it a good rub on that piece of paper, because otherwise you're just going to be bringing in that really dark graphite powder back onto the paper. Now, like I said at the beginning, if you did want to, sand down a lighter sort of graphite pencil, something closer to maybe the HB or the B, for example, you can easily do that. But I would always, until you're sure and you're confident, just do a little sort of rub on that plain piece of paper. It's better that you do it on that than coming in and popping it down on your paper, and then you've got to worry about how you're going to lift that pigment back off again. I mean, that's not a huge thing. That can be done. But the less work we have to give ourselves, I reckon, is better. Come up the edge here, nice and light. Just be careful with that charcoal. Just going to have to move my hand just a little bit here just to get the bottom edge. Like I said, you feel free to sort of just move. That's why I always like to put my drawings, tape my drawings to a board. Just a bit of MDF or something like that. Or some people use cardboard. Anything that just is, you can move it. So you can lift it up, and actually you don't really want to be touching your drawing if you can help it. And you'll notice that when I do my taping, I leave a little edge there. And depending on what I'm drawing, that can be ½ an inch or, a centimetre or something. So that when my tape comes off, I've actually got something to hold. And then if you do ever frame your artwork, you can bring your mat board right up to your drawing. You wouldn't want to be doing this black right up to the edge, because as soon as you held on to it, then you're touching your drawing, which we don't want to do. Okay, having a look, see if there's anything I just want to darken a little bit. Now it's going to be a little bit harder to judge the tonal value of this moon until we get our sleigh in. Because it is so dark, it will definitely have an impact on our tonal value. Because whatever's next to something as well can play a huge role in how we see things. So I might, after this, get that sleigh in. Now, there's this little sort of explosion where something sort of hit the ground. So I'm just going to take that paper stump and just sort of give the impression of those lines coming out. And we will bring this more out with our erasers, but we need to have a bit of that depth in there beforehand. And then there's another one sort of down here, so we could do a similar sort of thing. And just bring a few. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. But it does just sort of give us that idea before we put our eraser down on the paper. Like so. Okay, so let's come in and get these little reindeers done. I'm going to just come in, because there's no detail in this, I might just continue on with that mechanical pencil and see how we go. I might come over the top of it, maybe with a 9B or something like that. But I think to start with, I'm just going to come in with that. A little bit more control as well, with it being that lovely sort of thin point to that lead. So just again, little sort of circular motions, and you don't want to be pressing hard, especially with this type of pencil, because you will indent the paper if you press too hard. So just, I'd rather we can come in with, you know, a few layers than pressing too hard on our first one and then pushing into that paper. Now remember, we're probably not going to achieve the darkness that we've managed to achieve with our charcoal pencil, but we'll give it a good go. Again, try and get these little legs as best as you can. I've got a little bit sort of UFE again there, but well. When you're working on such a small little portrait, it's hard to get all that shapes and detail in there. This leg comes out over the top of those ones. Blocking paper if you need to. Bit of a funny shape, that one, doesn't it? We can always try and adjust it. We can use our Tombow Mono eraser, which is this one here. And I use this one all the time. And you can just put a little chiseled edge on it with a craft knife and then use that sharp point. And I've also just recently purchased these ones here. Like they're the Faber-Castell, and they're just like a pencil eraser. And these are really good because you do get a lot more control. So I'm going to try that one. Might not have much of an impact. I just want to see if I can just adjust the shape of his neck, his little body a little bit. Not much, but a little bit better. Just on to our last little guy here. Got his legs close as we can. I'm not going to attempt to put little hooves or anything like that in. Let's be realistic. Alright. Okay, so I want this definitely darkened down. I'm going to come back in across, just with the mechanical pencil to start with. And I'm just going to come back over the top. Again, nice and soft. Don't need to be pressing too hard. Yeah, kind of gone a little bit off there. Right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab my 9B pencil, if I can find it. Actually, I've got a... Oh no, here it is. I found it. All right. So this is just the Derwent. These are the pencils that I use for most of my my graphite drawings. So this is the 9B. So we're going to come across, and if you haven't got this one, you can either just keep building it up with your mechanical pencil if you've got one of those, or you can, you know, if yours only goes up to an 8B, for example, then just use the 8B. But what I find happens is if we add, so we've got the mechanical pencil down, and I usually come in near the end with my mechanical pencil, so I'm kind of doing this one a little bit back to front. But I find that if you put down a bit of this darker pigment, you know, maybe even a 7B, and then come back over it again with the mechanical pencil, it just seems to darken it down nicely. So we'll give that a wee try. And we're getting it a bit darker. And we did sort of kind of suspect that it was never going to be as dark as the charcoal. Look, if you wanted to try doing this, especially if you're doing it slightly bigger, then by all means use the, use the charcoal. I'm just coming back in now with that mechanical pencil. And can you see that? I don't know if the camera's picking that up. You can see how much darker it is now just by adding just a layer of that, of that 9B pencil. I'm not adding any more pressure here with the mechanical pencil. But yeah, you can just see how it's just that slight shift that made it just that little bit darker. I'm going to come back over his sled too. Darken that down a little bit. Again, same with this one. Back over the top. Now remember, I have two huge big lights above me here. So I am going to get a little bit of a glare coming down. So my little reindeers are looking a lot darker with my, with the naked eye than they are when I'm looking at the screen with the camera picking it up. Purely because it's got that bright light shining on it. I think there's too much of a gap here. Just going to adjust the body shape of this one just a little bit. I think that's about as much as we're going to manage. It's such a tiny little drawing, but that's not too bad. That's quite dark. I'm just going to have a look here. I think again, I'm just going to sort of make the little sort of tummy stick out a little bit. Get my eraser. So now's the time to sort of make any sort of little sort of adjustments to the shape. This one's probably not overly, maybe a tiny little bit down. That'll do. All right. So we've got him plotted in now, so now we can have a good look at some of these tonal values on the moon. And I don't think they're too bad, because like I said, I don't want these to be as dark as our reindeers, for example. So this isn't overly too bad. I do think though I may just need to come over, and I haven't put any more pigment onto my blender. And on some little spots here, I do think I need to add just a little bit more. Like I say, otherwise those highlights aren't going to show up. Now you might not need to do this on yours, obviously. Yeah, so you just sort of gauge that off of your drawing. All right. Now I'm going to come in now with the battery operated eraser. Now if you haven't got one of these, you can just use that Tombow eraser, and like I said, just cut yourself a bit of a chiseled edge on it and use that pointy edge there. But if you've got one of these, or if you can get your hands on one, they're not that expensive. You get them from, you know, any sort of office supply store or art store or Amazon, that sort of thing. And they usually come with two different sizes of eraser. This one is the smaller one, the thinner one. And all I do to just get a nice sort of point on that is turn it on. So you just press the button, and I just give it a few swipes back and forth on my sandpaper. And that just gives you a nice little point. So I'll do that now. So you just go back and forth, and you can see that that just gives you a nice little point there, like so. Now, when you use one of these, turn it on before you put it on your paper. Reason being, if you are on your paper and you're touching the paper, you hit the button, with it, as soon as it sort of goes, it can give you a little jerk. And it can lift off more pigment than you actually want to be lifting off. So always turn it on first so that you've got the feel of that in your hand, and then pop it down. So all we're going to do here is I'm just going to do some sort of little sort of circles. You can see on the reference image where some of these craters are. I've already sort of hinted at some of them, so I'll go round those. But just on the rest of the moon, you can just see little craters everywhere. So like I said, we're not going to be able to put them all in, but we'll try our best to get as much as we can to actually make it look like a moon. So first of all, I'm just going to come around some of these ones that I've put the little dots on. So turn it on and then just come round. Like I said, don't overdo it, because when you are working on a smaller sort of scale, less is more. I think the more detail you try to pack in there, the more unrealistic it can look. Now, normally I would be coming in now with my brush if this was just a graphite drawing, and I would be brushing all of these little erasings off. Now, I can't do that in this case because if I do that, all of that charcoal is going to come down onto the moon. So for this instance, I'm just going to grab that puffer tool and just puff away those little erasings. Now, that's about all of the ones that I've sort of highlighted. What I'm going to do now is just create some, and I'm not going to worry about where they're positioned really. Down here, there's a few, so we're just going to do the circle. Some are smaller. Just come in and just do little sort of dots even. And then I'll show you how we'll build those up as we go. Mindful of that glassine, keep that moving. And some of them are slightly different sort of shapes. Like I said, don't want to overdo it. So adjust your sizes. Now this one here, now how we had those little explosions, you can just sort of lighten up that center and then just take that and treat it like a pencil and just sort of pull some of those. And don't worry if these look a bit sort of, at the moment it's looking a bit like a spider, but we'll tone that down in a second. Same with this one down here, just in between those darker marks we made. And then there's some that are just like little dots. Now, these are hardly showing up. Now, it could be one of two things. It could be either that you haven't got enough graphite down, or it could be that the tip of your eraser is picking up that graphite, and you can see that mine's is. So what we need to do is just give that a wee rub again on our sandpaper. Get that nice clean point, and then we can come back in and pick those up. Like I said, some of these are really small. Like I said, less is more. We don't want to be going, we don't want to be going too mad on these dots. Otherwise it'll end up looking a bit like Swiss cheese. Okay, we'll stop there at the moment. A couple, this seems to be quite sort of empty, so I might just add a couple in there. Maybe one in there. I mean, you could spend, don't get me wrong, you could spend a lot longer on this, on, you know, your drawing, and just sort of build up some more of these, you know, these little craters and everything. Now what we want to do now, and I'll just get rid of some of those little erasings. Okay, so where we've created these little white dots, they've got really, at the moment, they're looking like little sort of onion rings or calamari rings at the moment. We want to be making them look a bit more like a crater. So what we need to do is we need to darken down the inside of the ring and the outside bottom edge. So I'll show you on this one. So we just want to sort of on there, and then a bit of shading down below. Now this is a little bit dark, don't worry about it. You can always try our HB. We try it with that. Really just as dark, so we'll tone that down. So I'll just continue with the mechanical pencil. So just remember, inside edge and then outside. And just go around all of them. You don't need to be pressing too hard on it. So trying to get the bigger ones done first. Now the ones that we haven't sort of done the shading in, treat them exactly the same, no difference. Just inside a little bit and underneath. And then that just sort of gives us that sort of slightly 3D effect. You still want to be seeing a bit of that white above it if you can. And then when we go onto these smaller ones, just, you don't need as much then. You can just little dab. Sometimes you don't even need the one at the bottom, but it's good because it's sort of, as you can imagine, something's hit the moon, it's gone into the hole, and then everything else is sort of spewed up like a volcano. So you want that darker edge there, which is going to make it look like that's the shadow being cast from that little crater. These tiny little ones, which might just need just a little dab, little dot even sometimes. Just careful with that. If you find that your glassine's getting a bit dirty, you can just grab just even a microfiber cloth or a bit of kitchen roll, and I just like to just give that a bit of a wipe on that underneath edge so that it's nice and clean when I do sort of pull it back across over the top. And I would do that even if I was just using graphite, not just because I'm using the charcoal. Try and sort of locate all these little dots that we did. Fascinating thing, the moon. I love looking up at the moon and the stars at night, and you know, it's fascinating how we're seeing that star that, you know, potentially maybe isn't even there anymore. I'd love to do a larger portrait of the moon, so I'll add that to my list to do one day. I think the detail that you could get in would just be spectacular. Okay, now at the moment these are looking just a little bit too sort of in your face sort of thing. So we want to soften that down a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab just a cleaner Q-tip. Not a Q-tip. I use Q-tips a lot in my pastel drawings, so I've got that in my brain. Just going to make sure it's reasonably clean. Give it a wee wipe on that paper. And then all I'm going to do is come in and I'm just going to just soften and even sort of come over the top of it a little bit and just sort of tone it down. So just softening that pencil mark we made, and then maybe just coming over the top. Oh, I've missed that one there. Come in that little one. And then same, bit of a soften. Same with these ones here. And again, you can just very gently even just rub that over the top. Just sort of not making it look quite so white. Now some of them are lovely and bright, so just sort of mix it up a little bit. You don't want to be sort of muting them all. These tiny little ones, just again, just a little dab. And just work your way around them all. Like I said, just a little dab, just softening it so it's not so harsh. Like these ones here, sort of tone down a bit. Apply a bit more pressure there. Another little. Come back in with that one that's got a bit more of that pigment on it. Paper stump, and just see if there's some little sections that you'd like to just darken a little bit. We can also just sort of come in and just add a few darker sort of spots. And just little sort of dabs. Don't want to be causing circles, but we just want to create a bit of that texture. So just sort of little squiggles. These I think are a bit too bright. Tone these down a little bit. What we can also do with our kneadable eraser is if we grab that and just get a reasonably sort of rounded, sort of stumpy end to it. And what you can do is you can just sort of dab. And what that'll do is it'll just lift a bit of that pigment off. And just tone it down a little bit. There's little taps. Some of these we don't want as dark as well as I've got them anyway. Again, you're constantly just having a bit of a sit back and having a look, and it'll jump out at you what you know, if you've got something that's a bit too dark, or you've got a few too many of these of these craters. Little taps. You want to keep a couple of them really sort of vibrant and sort of, really sort of noticeable. But that's how you can just tone things down, and you might not need to. You might not need to do that on your drawing. Now again, needle bit eraser is brilliant. You can sort of get it into tiniest little sort of points, and then you can just sort of dab, you can lift pigment where you want to. So have a play around with your, with your different erasers and see what they can do. This one here, I'm just going to come in with that and I'm just going to soften. I'm just going to dab. I don't want to sort of lose the effect that I'm trying to go for, but at the same time I don't want it to look like a daisy either. Same with this one down here. Again, you can just give a dab. The centre of that one's a little bit darker, so we can always just come back in with that paper stump. Maybe just add a couple of little darker marks there. This one's probably too dark, but we can just dab that darker area, lift that pigment a little bit. Like I said, you could literally spend hours working, on this. I'm going to add just a couple of a little more shading around those ones. Again, we can just sort of add some darker little dots as well here and there. And the combo eraser, for example, so if you don't have a battery one, just come in with that. I'll just make sure that's clean. I was using that on another project. So a nice clean edge. So I've just, as you can see, just cut it into a bit of a chiseled edge there, and then use that top pointy end. And then we can just come in with that and use that just to lighten some of these ones that are darker. You can see that they've got a bit of a lighter section around the whole sort of crater. Like I said, you don't need the battery operated one, but if you can get a hold of one, then yeah, you won't regret having one, I don't think. Okay, just a few dabs. Again, this is more just for texture as well, just to create a little bit more texture on the surface of the moon. But again, we can always use this eraser, this Tombow one. Use it to pull a few of those strokes through a little bit longer, perhaps. But yeah, just have a bit of a play, with it. Yeah. This is never designed to be a masterpiece. Fun little project for us. Again, we can dab that Tombow eraser around the edge if we want to be a little bit lighter. Don't want that to be a harsh edge though. We can either just dab it with that Tombow eraser, or we can come in with our kneadable eraser. Little taps. Just clean up this little edge here with my charcoal. That's made the slightest bit of difference, has it? Be very careful though, and I'm notorious for it. I will see something that I think I want to fix that probably wasn't that bad to start with, but the more you start playing with it, the more chance you've got of it, you know, coming a bit of a cropper. So probably the only last thing I want to do is I'm just going to see if I can get those little reindeers any darker. Just trying to find my 9B. I might try it just one more time. Actually, I will tell you a good one to have a look for, and I might give it a go. I usually use the Caran d'Ache Graphwood black, and it is excellent. I find that it is much darker than the Derwent black. So if you haven't got this one, don't stress, it doesn't matter. Just your 9B you were using before. Yeah, it does actually. So we can always come back over again if we're not happy. We think it could just be a little bit darker. Yeah, I think that's darkened that down just another little smidgen. But again, you judge this off of your drawing. And I mean, if you've used the charcoal for your reindeers, then that won't be an issue because it should be lovely and dark anyway. And I normally wouldn't be forcing this sort of dark pigment if I was planning on lifting any sort of highlights off that area. But because I'm not with these reindeer, it's just the reindeer, I know I can afford to be a little bit more heavy-handed. And that's actually quite dark. I'm actually quite happy with how dark that's actually brought it. Okay, now one last sort of little technique. I'll see if I can find my brush. There we go. This is just an old brush that I had lying around, and you can see that it is a little bit sort of got a bit of wear and tear to it, and it's reasonably sort of hard bristled brush. And these are really good as well, just for a blending tool. So you could always just come in and just come over the top. Don't go onto your charcoal in this case though. But again, it's just another tool that you can use that just sort of softens. You can just go over just with little swirly motions. And I like this sort of thing rather than coming back in with your blender, you know, your paper stump, because, you know, it's unless it's a brand new one, you're going to have a bit of pigment on there. I just think it's not overly noticeable, but it does just gives that sort of softness. But that's just another, like I said, a cheap brush is all you need. Don't go buy anything fancy. Again, we'll just have a little sit back. I think this little used to be a bit rounder. A little bit of a funny shape, that one. Again, like I said, you could play around with this for hours. But just remember, sometimes less is more. All I might do is just bring a few of those darker little lines around that, make that pop a little bit more. Right. I think I'll call that one done. Now please feel free to just, continue on, build up your little craters. But remember, keep in mind the size of the drawing you're doing and how much detail is realistic. But yeah, I think I'm going to call that one done. All right, so I really hope you enjoyed that one. I'd love to see your finished drawings over in our free Facebook community, so please share. Yeah, I'll catch you in the next one.